Hello, everyone, and welcome to Africa Fire Mission's weekly virtual training session. My name is Mike, and I'm the programs director here at Africa Fire Mission, and we're so happy that you took time out of your busy schedules to join us for today's training. Today, we're going to be taking a look at apparatus maintenance and inspections, giving you some things to look at on your apparatus, whether it's a fire truck or an ambulance, to try to make things a little bit safer, maybe help you identify some problems as they crop up and how to document what you find so that you can make sure that things are taken well care of. So we'll dive into that in just a little bit. But before we get started with today's training, I'm going to pass things over to Errol Sianga. Errol is Africa Fire Mission's fire safety advocate, and he's going to get us started with a couple words of encouragement.
Thank you very much, Chief Mike. Good evening, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon. So, as you continue introducing yourself in the chat and telling us how you're doing as you join us in today's lesson, I'd like us to have a word of encouragement. So, our word of encouragement is just from telling us that in each and every day, we need to increase in our knowledge, in our wisdom, and in understanding. In everything that you do, in everything that we are, where we are, let's increase our wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. So also, if the Bible tells us in the book of James, chapter 1, verse 5, it says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. So all of us, let's go ahead and pray for wisdom, more knowledge, and understanding as we interact with each other, as we work in our fire station, and also as we interact with the community as well. So thank you very much, and over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Errol. We appreciate those words of encouragement and the work that you've been doing to try to help promote the best interests of firefighters throughout all of Africa. So we appreciate you. Before we get started with today's training, let me just touch on a couple of administrative items. If you stick around for at least 70% of today's training, which is usually about 40 or 45 minutes, you can earn a certificate of attendance for today's training. If your network drops out or you get a fire call or whatever takes place, you can't finish today's training, no worries. There are other ways that you can get that certificate of attendance if that's something that you're interested in. I encourage everyone to head over to our webpage at www.africafiremission.org. Go to that resources tab. That tab is for you guys. That tab is for firefighters in Africa. There's a bunch of great materials available there. If you go under the resources tab and you go to training materials, there you'll find a registration link for these weekly virtual training sessions. There's also a link to our Google Drive where we have last year and this year's trainings. There's a video recording of them. You can watch the video, answer a couple questions to let us know that you consumed all that content, that you stayed through, listened to the whole class, and I can get you a certificate of attendance for those as well. So be sure to check that out. There's a bunch of other great resources that are available there under that resources tab. They're all free for you to take, use however you need to get out there into your community and do education, to get yourself some better training, to refresh yourself on topics. So please get into that, check it out, explore what we've got there. There's lots of great resources there. If you're joining us with multiple people on your screen, I'll drop a note in the chat. You can send me an email and let me know who's joining you today for that training, and we'll get that certificate out to all those people. Okay, so just let me know, who it is that's joining you. Also, your screen name, whatever you've got listed as your screen name right now on the screen, I need you to adjust that to whatever you want your certificate to read, okay? Whatever your screen name is, that's the name that goes on that certificate through our system. So if you want some changes there, please go ahead and take care of that now. That's all I have so far as our administrative notes go. So we're going to start diving right into today's training. And today we're gonna get our hands dirty a little bit. we're going to be looking at apparatus maintenance and inspection. Um, and so we're going to talk a little bit about why it's important to have some kind of a program put together. And then we're going to take you through some inspections that you can do of the vehicle, point out some things we want you to take a look at to make sure some of these mechanical systems are functioning well and keeping you guys and your crew safe when you're out there on the road, as well as keeping, the general public safe as well. What are we going to talk about here? We'll talk a little bit just about what is an apparatus maintenance program, give you some tips on some documentation, reporting, and follow-up. The bulk of our time, we're going to be doing some inspection procedures, showing you what you should be looking for. And we're going to talk a little bit about vehicle cleanliness as well and how that plays into a apparatus maintenance program. Okay. So, as we go in and we look at this, what is a preventative maintenance program? Essentially, you need some documentation. It'd be great if you had a standard operating procedure, a written SOP that tells you, what you should be doing so far as inspecting and maintaining your vehicles. How are you going to develop that apparatus maintenance program? Well, there are some internationally accepted standards out there. So if you look at some of those standards, that's going to give you that framework of how to build a proper program. Part of that written procedure should be the who, what, and when. Who's going to be responsible for carrying out these inspections or this maintenance? What specifically are they going to do? And then what's the time frame for that? And we'll touch on that a little bit later as we go through our thing here. And then the other key component is documentation, right? If you don't document something, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. So what do we do as far as recording this stuff, reporting what we find in our inspections and that sort of thing? Those recognized standards that I was talking about here in the US, of course, our main standard that we look at is NFPA. NFPA has gone through and they're reorganizing a lot of their standards. So they've combined some together. They've renumbered some of them. So the current standard, new as of 2024, is NFPA 1910. It's a mouthful. It is the standard for the inspection, maintenance, refurbishment, testing, and retirement of in-service emergency vehicles and marine firefighting vehicles. So, big mouthful. Basically, here's where we're going to get some ideas about how we should be inspecting and maintaining our vehicles if we have to have them refurbished, which means sort of rebuilt, remanufactured, fixed up, how to do that, and how to test them, and a little bit about retirement too, when it's time to put them out of service for good. You don't have to use the NFPA standard by any stretch of the imagination. There are some European standards. Maybe you've got local standards, whatever that is. Find some sort of a standard, and that's what you're going to build your program off of. Another thing I want to note with the NFPA standards, it's difficult to find them that aren't behind a paywall, but all of the NFPA standards, you can read them for free through NFPA's website. Now, when you get in there, they're going to give you options to pay for it. And when you pay for it, depending on the level that you pay for, you could get a paper copy, or you could get where you can copy and paste it. But for free, you can read it. You won't be able to copy and paste it off of the screen or anything like that. But if you want to read those standards, those NFPA standards are available for reading for free. So you just have to look and dig and be careful what you're looking at. But they are available out there. So I encourage you to take a look at that. And of course, these NFPA standards cover, everything within the fire service. So once you get in there looking at your vehicle stuff, feel free to look around and see what else you can learn. Time frames, sort of the who, what, and when. I'm not going to get into a lot of specifics about this because it really depends on a lot of different factors, right? But you're looking at things that you're going to probably do daily. Some things you're going to check maybe on a weekly basis. Other things you might decide to check on a monthly basis. When we're doing our equipment inspections, we monthly is about the longest stretch that we want to go without giving a pretty thorough look at all of our equipment, whether it's our apparatus, the hand tools, whatever. Um, we want to look at everything at least once a month. It'd be up to you in the local area to decide what that time frame is going to be. In a lot of areas, your driver or your operator, chauffeur, whatever you call the guy that's running that piece of equipment, in a lot of areas, they can do some of the minor, deal with some of the minor issues. If there's a tire that's low on air, they can add air to it. Sometimes they can, top off oil or fluids, things like that. Uh, and I understand that that's very difficult to accomplish, but if you can find those things that the driver can handle on their own and come up with a system that allows them to do that without having to go through more of a sort of bureaucratic process up through the ranks and things, that's going to help keep these vehicles on the road a lot more because you're getting to these minor issues right away before they become into a bigger problem. If you do have these bigger problems, right, you may need a mechanic to get involved, whether that's somebody that works for your city, that works for your county, whatever that may be. So when we're looking at trying to decide this maintenance schedule, when are we going to do these things? Like I said, there's lots of different factors. It's going to vary based on your fire brigade policies. Shift schedules may come into that. Whether you work in a 24-hour shift or an 8-hour shift or a 12-hour shift, your staffing levels may dictate how thorough or when you have time to do these things, and whatever your local procedures may be. Um, some of these items are some things that we want to do at the beginning of the shift. I'll try to mention when we're doing this inspection process a couple things, basic things like checking the oil, checking the tires, and performing a brake check. Those should be done at the start of every shift, no questions asked. Some of the other stuff that we're looking at can be looked at, on a little bit longer time frame. But you've got to work your way through that, figure out how you want to do that, and then develop some paperwork to document that you've been doing those things. So what's that look like? What's the process? How's this going to work? Well, first thing is we discover something needs repaired, right? And that comes either from our daily inspection, weekly, monthly, whatever. We've discovered that needed repair. We've got to document it somehow. So you should have some kind of an inspection sheet. A checklist would be great. That checklist helps people remember everything they're supposed to look at, make sure things are done, and you can physically check it off to show that it's done. Maybe you need a work order. Some places require a work order where if something needs repaired, you have to write out on a specific type of document for a work order and turn that in. So whatever that is, whatever your documentation policy is, be sure it's documented, written down, noted somewhere. Then notify the supervisor, okay? If it's something that you can fix on your own and it's just topping up a little bit of oil, you top it off with oil and you let the shift commander or whoever's that person that you report to, hey, we were a little low on oil today. I just topped it off. It's always good to notify, even on the minor things like that, so that there can be planning for, oh, well, we need to replace our spare oil soon or whatever that may be, right? On the bigger items, that the supervisor has to get involved because they've got to schedule with a mechanic at the city to fix it, whatever that may be. That the supervisor is going to take that action, and somebody's going to follow up on it in a reasonable amount of time. Uh, what's a reasonable amount of time? Well, it all depends on the severity of the issue. Um, if the vehicle's out of oil and you're gonna, if you run it for a month without oil in it, that is not a reasonable amount of time, right? You're going to ruin the motor, right? So whatever that reasonable amount of time is, somebody needs to take some action. Make sure there's some follow-up with that too. If you're the person that reported it and you don't see things um, getting the attention that they need, you want to do some follow-up with that. And the last thing is, be sure that you're taking immediate action for any kind of a serious issue. So, that brake system we were talking about, if something happened that we're going to talk about, if something happens, it fails one of the tests that I'm going to show you how to do. Uh, it needs to be taken, immediate action needs to be taken, whether that's taking it out of service, sending it for immediate repair or something. But on those serious issues that are going to cause problems right away, you got to make sure that you take immediate action on those. Okay. So what's that going to look like? That's up to you. That's up to your fire brigade and how that your system works and what you're used to so far as reporting to supervisors, work orders, and all that sort of stuff. But the idea of this is to get you guys thinking about what this may look like in your fire brigade. So what are we doing for this, for the actual inspections as we start to look at this, or what, a daily or whatever, right? And the big thing is we're just going to do a walk around of the vehicle. It doesn't matter what direction you do, where you start from. Typically, you want to do it sort of the same way every time, just so that you make sure that you're not missing anything, that you develop some kind of routine or a habit for how you're going to go about doing this. I would typically would try to sort of cluster some systems together as you work your way around the vehicle. Um, but come up with some sort of way. We're going to do this all around, walk around, looking at a bunch of different stuff as we go. So that initial, approach as you're walking up to the vehicle, right? Take a look at it. Take a look at it overall. It's, look at the appearance of the stance, right? Is it sitting level, or is it leaning to the left, or is it leaning to the right, or is the front passenger side, dipping down and the rest of the truck is sitting up? Well, what could that mean? Well, maybe there's a broken leaf spring. Maybe there's something wrong with the shocks, which are part of the suspension system. Maybe you've got a flat tire, there's low air in the tire. So just looking at how that truck is sitting can give you a clue right off the bat. There's something wrong here. It's leaning to one side or the other, right? Um, Look for dripping fluids. Look for puddles underneath the vehicle. If we can see stuff dripping off, puddles underneath of that vehicle, um, clear signs that something's leaking. Maybe it's just a little drip of water from the water tank. Of course, that becomes a larger problem, but whatever that is, we've got to chase those down. So we're going to take a look at where those puddles are forming and things like that and trying to locate the source of that. We'll talk a little bit more about that and look at some pictures here later. Just look around as you're walking around the vehicle, checking for things. If you're seeing stuff dripping, there could be a bad seal, leaking gasket, broken hoses, seeping hoses, different things like that. So, starting with that overall look. All right. We want to get underneath the hood. We want to look at the actual engine, and we need to check the engine oil. Typically, the engine oil can be checked with what we call a dipstick. The dipstick is typically yellow in color, so the red arrow on this particular slide pointing to that yellow cap with a handle on it. Grab a hold of that, pull it out, wipe it off so that it's clean, stick it back down in, and pull it out again and check the level. Okay, there should be marks on that dipstick that tell you if you're low, if there's too much oil, something like that. If it's low, you need to add extra oil. Sort of operating on the assumption that most of your vehicles are going to be diesel engines. A diesel engine typically runs on 15W40 weight oil. That's pretty universal and pretty easy to find. Top it off with oil. If you've got low oil is going to cause wear on the engine. and that's going to shorten the engine life. If the oil level is dropping, and part of that reason we're checking it daily is to see if it gets lower and lower every day. You know, you can look at it on the dipstick and it'll be in the range that says there's enough. But if you notice it getting a little lower and a little lower and a little lower every day, that tells you we've got a problem. There's a leak or there's a mechanical problem that's burning this oil. So we got to track it down and figure out what's going on there. On the same side, if you're checking that oil every day and no one else is adding oil to it, but it looks like it's getting more and more oil each day, that indicates that there's a problem as well, because maybe you're getting fuel leaking into the oil or coolant leaking into the oil, increasing the volume of that. So that could be a problem as well. So changes in that engine oil level tell us, give us a clue as to what might be going on inside the engine. While we're right there under the hood, power steering. If your vehicle's got power steering, looking for the power steering fluid reservoir. It's usually a little white plastic canister like you see there. Now, this is a closed system, all right? So with a closed system like this, there is no reason for that level of power steering fluid to ever change. Um, it's there, it functions as you're using it, but there's no part of it that should be burning it or leaking or anything like that. So you should really never have to add fluid there. You shouldn't be losing it. If you are, it's telling you there's something wrong. Okay, so if that power steering level gets low or is indicated as low on there, you've got a leak. There's something wrong. So you've got to start chasing hoses, following the system, and see if you can find where it's leaking and what part needs to be repaired. Can you operate with low power steering fluid? It will still work, but it's going to overheat the power steering pump. And once that happens, it can cause the power steering failure. If you lose that, then it's very difficult to turn that wheel and sort of drive the vehicle with that manual steering. So we don't want to run that. Power steering fluid is its own special fluid. There should be some of that on hand. Okay, small bottle of that kept on hand in case you would need to add it. Diesel engines have these fuel filters. Can be located in various places. Sometimes they're up underneath. Sometimes they're down in the top. Um, some of these engines may have more than one fuel filter. Uh, Take a look at the fuel filter, look around it, be sure it looks like it's in decent condition, look at where the fuel lines are coming into it, make sure there's no leaks or no evidence of anything leaking, anything like that. That's a pretty important part of your system. Your manufacturer's recommendations based on the type of engine that you have will tell you how often you need to change that fuel filter. It's very important. If the fuel filter gets clogged, you're not going to get enough fuel into the engine. It's going to give you all sorts of problems. Sometimes that fuel filter and your water separator that we'll look at next, sometimes those are separate. Sometimes they're all in one component. So you have to look around and see what you can find. Fuel water separator is something that helps to keep the water out of the fuel. So in this separator, the fuel will float on the top. The water will come to the bottom. In this separator, there's typically a drain valve. As you're looking over the fuel water separator, make sure there's no leaks or anything like that. There should be. If you got the manuals for the vehicle that you've got, or if you research on the internet the make and model of the engine that you've got, you can find what the recommendations are when you should drain that. Typically, you're going to crack that drain valve open with something underneath to catch it as the fuel floats on top of the water. If there's water in that fuel water separator, right? When you open that valve, the water will come out first. When it changes from water to fuel, shut that valve back off. That's typically how you drain the fuel water separator. Diesel engine, for a diesel engine. Still under the hood, typically somewhere near the dipstick for the engine oil, you may see something similar dipstick there, but it's red in color. This is if you've got an automatic transmission. That will be your automatic transmission fluid. Of course, if you've got a manual, that's not going to apply. But the automatic transmission fluid, there's a couple of different ways to check it depending upon who made the engine. So you gotta figure that out. Some of them um, they want the vehicle to be off and cold, so they want you to check it when the engine hasn't run and hasn't been driven for a while. Excuse me. Um, some of them, the engine's got to be running and it's got to be up at operating temperature for you to check to get an accurate reading. So you've got to look that up. You've got to find out what the proper procedure is for the vehicle that you've got. When you're checking that, um, if you look at that transmission fluid, there's a little chart there that shows, automatic transmission fluid when it's brand new is like a bright red or a pinkish color. As it gets used, it turns a little bit more red. A little bit of a brown color starts coming into that. That's what used transmission fluid looks like. It's okay. You can keep using it. When it starts to get dark brown or it turns black, um, it's worn out. It's lost its lubricating properties. It needs to be replaced. So looking visually at that is going to tell you whether you need to change that fluid or not. Other examples or other problems that you might have, if it looks milky, if there's some sort of streaks of white, looks like a milky pink or a milky brown, that's telling us that there's some other fluid, typically water or something, that's getting somehow into that automatic transmission fluid. That's telling you you've got an internal leak in the system somewhere. That needs a visit from a mechanic. If it's got a burnt smell to it, when you check that, if it smells burnt, and you'll know it when you smell it. Also, you got to get that thing to a mechanic. If you keep running it, you're going to do some serious damage to the transmission. So um, that's your automatic transmission fluid. If you've got an automatic transmission, how to check it and what you're seeing there. Take a look, see if you've got any fans or fan belts under the hood there. Look at the condition of those belts. Check them for cracks. Uh, Check them to see if they're tight. If you've got a cooling fan, is the cooling fan able to spin? Is there any chips or anything broken? Is it hitting the shroud that's supposed to cover it and protect it? What kind of condition is that in? Depending upon the engine, there'll be a tensioner on your belts. Some of those tensioners, if you look at it, there's a tension gauge right there on that tensioner, which moves and holds the belt tight. So sometimes just sort of visually inspecting that will tell you whether it's properly tensioned or not. If it's not properly tensioned, those belts are going to slip. As those belts slip, they wear. As the belts wear, right, that shortens their life. If that belt breaks, depending upon how the engine is set up, a broken belt can cause all sorts of mechanical problems. Can trash the water pump. It can make you lose your power steering. All sorts of different things can happen depending upon what those belts are doing. So check those, make sure they're in good condition. And get a plan for replacing those belts if they're starting to get frayed, if they're worn, if they're cracked, dry rotted, whatever might be wrong with them. Okay. Uh, that fan that's in there, of course, is part of the vehicle cooling system. There should be a coolant reservoir that you can see in there underneath the hood. There should be some marks on that coolant reservoir that tell you, there's typically a hot and a cold mark. So that coolant expands and contracts based on temperature, and that coolant flows through the engine to help to keep it cool. And it also helps to warm it up if you've got cold weather. A lot of you don't deal with that, but um, so take a look at that level, read whether it's hot or cold, and then if the engine hasn't run for a while, you're looking at the cold level. If the engine's been up and running, it's at operating temperature, the thermostat's been opening and closing, there should be a reading for hot on there as well. Um, Take a look at it, add coolant if needed, uh, but be aware, like all coolant is not the same. Many years ago, really there was antifreeze, we called it, or coolant, and there was just one type. The green stuff was the most common. It's just a sort of a conventional coolant. But as the years have gone by, now there's all of these different types, and they're different colors. There's red, there's orange, there's pink, there's blue, there's green, and you can't mix the different colors together. There's some stuff that they sell out there that they call a universal coolant, but a universal coolant can't necessarily be used in all engines anyway, even though it's advertised as universal. So you got to figure out what type of coolant it takes. A lot of times you'll find that on some of those decals, some of those stickers that are on the coolant reservoirs or things. It'll tell you the type that you need to use. You've got to match that up. And then you got to look at the instructions on the coolant. Sometimes you can dilute that coolant with some water, uh, depending upon the operating temperatures and things like that. The instructions for that come on the bottle of the coolant. Also, again, look at the manufacturer, the owner's manual, research the engine, and figure out what type of coolant you should be using. Uh, while you're looking around that coolant system, look at the hoses, look for leaks, things like that. Looking under the engine, if you can see little pools of coolant sitting on some of the different motor mounts, or you see them laying around somewhere, right, that tells you that there's a leak. When the coolant evaporates away, sometimes you can see some little crystals that are left. If you're seeing evidence of that, it's telling you that there's a leak somewhere. So take a look for that. Um, if you've got to be constantly adding coolant or you're adding water, or on a regular basis, there's something wrong. There's a leak. You've got to try to track that down. If you don't have enough coolant in there, especially when you're operating in the hot weather, you're going to cause all sorts of engine damage when the engine overheats. Still underneath the hood a little bit, you've got some air filters. Um, Air filters are sort of critically important to your system, because if you get dirt or debris sucked into the air intake, right, because our vehicle's engines run and burn just like a fire, right? We need heat, fuel, and oxygen. Our fuel on a diesel engine, our fuel is diesel. Our oxygen comes in through the air filter, and our heat is either the glow plugs to get us started, or the heat comes from the compression of the cylinder, and the compression of the aerosolized diesel fuel generates enough heat to fire the diesel engine, right? But if that air filter is crumbling and falling apart, or the air filter is missing, and you're driving in the dirt and the dust, that dirt and the dust is going to get sucked in through the system. It's going to get all the way in to the cylinders. It can cause scoring. It can wear out the rings. It can ruin the engine. So we've got to keep those air filters in good condition. Pop the air filter out, take a look at it, inspect the housing, all the brackets and everything. Make sure everything's sealed up. Make sure nothing's broken. As those air filters get dirty, that restricts the airflow, that changes the way the engine runs, it changes the fuel mixtures and things like that. So you got to make sure you're staying on top of those air filters. Some people like to take an air compressor and use compressed air to blow out the air filter. That is not recommended, because that can damage that air filter. It can push some of the contaminants through the air filter. So when you reinstall it and fire up the engine, it sucks some of those into the engine. It can also make holes that are smaller than you can see, but big enough to allow dirt or dust to get in through there. If that gets inside the engine, it can damage them. So how do we clean that? Lightly tap it on something to dislodge the dirt and dust that's in it. If you've got access to a vacuum that you can vacuum it to get some of that dirt and dust out, that's the better option. If it needs if you don't, if you're not sure if it's looking pretty rough, replace it. Uh, it's important that we keep those air filters in good shape. Also, on these diesel engines, we've got this air filter restriction gauge. Sometimes they're in under the hood right near the where the air filter is. Sometimes they're somewhere in the cab. Um, they can also give you an idea of whether your air filter is getting clogged up or not. So take a look at those. When you change an air filter, if you put a new air filter in there, there's a reset button that you can hit to reset it so that that indicator is working properly for you. Um, while we're under the hood there, and we're not necessarily checking all of these, like I said, every day. The oil we want to check every day. Do we need to check the air filter every day? Probably not. But if we've been out in a dust storm or out in a really dusty, dirty area, maybe we want to check it. Those could be pushed back to a weekly or maybe a monthly check. Hoses, while you're under the hood, look at all the different rubber hoses. See if they're leaking. Look and see if they're bulged out, if they're puffed out in odd places. Look and see if they're cracked. Check the clamps that hold the hoses together to make sure they're tight. Look for signs of leaking near the connections and things like that. Look for, those evaporated fluids or fluids dripping or pooling somewhere. Check the hoses, make sure they're in all in decent shape. Out from under the hood, we start looking sort of around the underside of the vehicle and things like that. Take a look at the tires. The tires are your lifeline and your connection to the road. Tires that are in poor conditions can lead to a rapid failure. If you're responding and driving quickly down the highway, you blow a tire out, good chance that vehicle is gonna cause you some sort of an accident. Your driver's gonna lose control of the vehicle. So you got to stay on top of those tires. Look for missing chunks. Look for bulges. Look for dry rot. Cracking in the tires. If you can see any of those radial cords are exposed somewhere, that tire is facing imminent failure, right? Check the depth of the tread. They make specific gauges for measuring tread depth. Most of your tires, if you look at those, they'll have a wear indicator on them. So you're looking at the tread and you can see the nice, especially on a new tire, you see that nice, deep, clean cut in the tread. And then there'll be a little bump in there. That little bump that's in there, that's the wear indicator. So when those little wear indicators get even with all of the treads on the tires, it's done. It's past its service life. You need to get those new tires. Tires are very expensive. I'll throw this other little piece out there. Here in the U.S., um, we are supposed to replace these tires after 6 years. They say there's only a shelf life of 6 years on those tires. So no matter how many kilometers you've put on them, they want them replaced every 6 years. And tires are really expensive. Um, I'm throwing that out there that there is sort of like a shelf life or an expiration date on tires. Take it for what it's worth and your own situation, but I just want to add that information out there. When we're looking down there near the tires, we can look at some of the suspension system, leaf springs and mounts. The leaf springs, these are what carry the weight of the vehicle. So you're going to look at those. This is, I don't know if you can see my mouse pointer, but this is your leaf spring right here. Check out the U-bolts. They're just what you would think. It's a bolt shaped like a U. Make sure they're positioned properly. make sure they're clamped on there tight, they're not moving. Um, uh, Look at the spring hangers. Over here are your spring hangers. Make sure that the bolts and things are tight there. If there's bushings, you can grab a hold of these components. Like, we're getting our hands dirty today, right? We're going to grab a hold of these, shake them, look for play, see if they're moving at all. Um, Bump stops, the sort of rubber pads, where the weight of the vehicle rests on the springs and things like that. Check them out. Look and see if they're worn. Look and see if they're damaged. If they're worn, sometimes the wear pattern on those can give you an indication of what something that may be wrong with the vehicle. Other suspension components to help smooth out the ride for you can be shock absorbers. Take a look at the shock absorbers. Look at how they're mounted. Make sure they're tight. Um, Make sure there's no fluids leaking from them. Make sure they're not dented, dinged up, or banged up. They also control, they control the smoothness of the ride, but also help to carry that weight. So critical component of the system. Looking those over to make sure they're in good shape. Up front, while you're looking at those different components, you've got the components for the steering. Okay, you can grab a hold of those and shake them a little bit, see if there's any kind of play, where they're wiggling around, where they're moving in there, that would indicate that something's wrong. Check the steering knuckle. That's up here. Um, uh, Check the different the pitman arms, the drag lengths. Make sure nothing's bent, nothing's cracked. Check all the different joints. So some of these components have what we call a castle nut on top of there. That nut isn't necessarily completely tight on there, but it's just on there to hold it together. And then there's a cotter pin that goes through the bolt uh, and through the little notches on that castle nut. So make sure those cotter pins are still there and they're not missing. If those cotter pins are missing, those castle nuts can vibrate and back themselves off and fall off. Imagine what would happen if you lose some of those nuts that hold the components of the steering together, right? So check those out. Make sure they're good. Maybe you've got some tie rods and sway bars underneath of there. These help with the horizontal, the side-to-side stability of the vehicle. The leaf springs and the shocks are the vertical component. The tie rods and the sway bars help with the side-to-side stability. They're the lowest parts hanging underneath the vehicle typically, so they're the first ones that get damaged. So you want to get underneath there. Take a look at those, see if they're bent or damaged. Check the bushings, check the joints, make sure everything's tight. Things aren't starting to get loose in there. Okay. Again, something like that, we're not going to check that every day necessarily, but at least once a month we want to be looking at those. While we're under there looking at that kind of stuff, check out the exhaust system. Look for the heat shields. Make sure that the heat shields are in place. They're going to keep other engine components from getting too hot, or they're going to keep you from getting burnt if it's an exterior exposed exhaust. Make sure they're all in place. Check the mounting brackets. Make sure everything's hanging on up there, mounted well and tight. How do we know if the exhaust system is leaking? Well, this picture shows you that arrow is pointing to a spot. If you see that black soot, that black carbon buildup on there, that's telling you there's an exhaust leak that you want to get fixed, especially if that exhaust leak is somewhere up in front near the cab or something like that. We don't want that exhaust getting up into the cab where we got to breathe that stuff. It causes cancer and all sorts of bad stuff. So check the exhaust system for leaks. Well, I guess this slide I maybe should have had under the hood, but sometimes the batteries aren't always under the hood on these bigger vehicles. But, take a look at your batteries, make sure that they're relatively clean. Check the connections. Make sure that the connections aren't corroded. It's common to see corrosion at the battery connections where um, there's like a white powdery substance all over where the battery cables connect. Um, you want to clean that off, brush that off. Don't get that stuff on your skin or your clothes. It is acidic. It can cause some burns. If you get some of that white powdery stuff on your clothes, you don't get it off of there immediately. It'll eat away at it, and it'll eat right through that. I had a nice jacket that I leaned against and got some of that stuff on it and just kind of brushed it away, didn't wash it off. And by the next week, I had holes all over my nice jacket. So be careful with that stuff, but keep them clean. If the battery connections are too corroded, that interferes with starting and charging and can cause you all sorts of problems. When your batteries aren't operating in peak condition, they could cause all sorts of intermittent electrical problems that are hard to chase down and figure out what's wrong with it. Um, if you're having electrical issues, sometimes checking out the battery to make sure the battery is in good condition is the first thing you want to check. Um, Air tanks and airlines, really important, especially if we're dealing with air brake systems, which is what we're going to get into next. Underneath of there will be, you'll have a couple of air tanks, um, typically at least two, primary and a secondary. Check those out. There are bleeders on those tanks that you should open up at regular intervals to drain the any oil or air that collects inside it, or excuse me, not oil and air, oil and water that collects. They will collect water. That's normal. If you're getting a lot of excessive moisture or oil inside those, that could be a problem with your compressor system. So that can clue you in that there might be something going wrong there. Check out the mounting brackets. Listen for air leaks when the system's aired up. Look for bulges in the hoses. Check where they connect. Check the general condition. All right. The air is important. The air goes into our brake system. Here's just sort of a little diagram of a typical drum air brake system, right? You've got your brake chamber, your brake canister there. There's some springs in there, and there's a diaphragm in there, and your air pressure, pushes. When that air pressure pushes on that push rod, um, it the air, the air pressure pulls that push rod in, lets the brakes come loose. You've got the push rod and your slack adjuster in there, your brake pads and shoes on the inside of it. If you run out of air, then those springs are going to cause you're going to stop pushing against the springs, and that's going to cause the brakes to lock on. If you've got a problem, an air leak or something, or one of your brakes locks up, we'll show you how to temporarily unlock that as we get through and look at these different components. You've got two different types of brakes. You've got your parking brake and your service brake. Okay, whether you've got a hydraulic brake system or an air brake system, your parking brake is what keeps the vehicle from moving. So here's the simple test for your parking brake. The one on the right shows you sort of the hydraulic brake, typically like a pedal that you're going to push down off to the side. Where your air brake system has that yellow air brake controller. The simple test for this, put the parking brake on, get into a drive gear, and gently try to pull forward with the parking brake on and see if it holds. You're not going to stomp on the accelerator, but just put a little resistance on as you start to drive away and make sure that that brake is holding, right? Your service brakes, that's your brake pedal. Okay, we don't want to use the parking and the service brakes at the same time. That's not good for the brake system. But check them out, make sure they're working. Pull forward at a slow speed and apply the brakes. When you put those brakes on, see, does the vehicle pull one side or the other? If it pulls, one way or the other, that can tell you that there's something wrong. It should stop nice and evenly. Listen for grinding noises. Listen for something out of the ordinary, squeaking, grinding, squealing or something when you're applying those brakes. How does the pedal feel, right? Um, Sometimes just the way it feels through your foot, that pedal goes soft and easy all the way down to the floor. That's a problem. When we're testing these brakes, if we find that the brakes aren't working, you find anything safe, you got to take it out of service until it gets fixed. On these air brake systems, um, this would be more of a monthly thing, right? But take a look at the slack adjusters. Make sure that they're securely mounted on there. Um, See if they're bent, broken, loose, anything's missing with it, right? Chalk the wheels so the vehicle can't roll away, and release the brakes. And then you should be able to get in there with a screwdriver and pry on that slack adjuster, and that you should be able to get that to move. Okay, make sure that's moving. That push rod shouldn't really move more than about an inch, right? And look at the angle of the push rod and the slack adjuster. It shouldn't be less than 90 degrees. It shouldn't be back here less than 90 degrees. It should be 90 degrees or greater, okay? And there's an overstroke indicator there. If you can see that overstroke indicator, that tells you your brakes are too far out of adjustment, okay? And it could be because the pads are worn out or something, so you got to do some more investigating if you're seeing issues with those slack adjusters. This is the canister part of the brake system. Take a look at that, inspect it for damage. There's some strong springs inside of there. There's a diaphragm inside of there. Your air pressure goes in there, and then that controls the brakes, um, whether it's releasing air as the brakes are getting applied, or putting air pressure to it, to release the brakes, right? Whatever the function is. On those brake canisters, there should be this little emergency release key. That's what you use to cage the brakes. If one side of your brakes lock up, and they can't move, you take that bolt out of there. It's like a bolt with a washer and a nut on it. You pop open that little dust cap, stuff that bolt down in there, and give it a little twist until it catches and you can't pull it out. You drop the washer on top, put the nut on top, tighten it up with a wrench. As you tighten that, that is what's going to release the brakes. You're compressing that spring in there. It's called caging the brakes. It's going to release the brake. You only want to mess with that if like one of your brakes locks up. You can cage that one side and very carefully get you to a repair center or something like that. But that's a procedure if the brake locks up and you need to release it. Or if you need to get the vehicle towed, you got to cage those on both sides. While you're in there looking at the brake stuff, check out the drums, check out the linings. If you can see in there, make sure that nothing's cracked, things don't look worn. Look at your indicators for how thick your pads are and things like that. Be sure there's nothing leaking onto those pads. If you get oil or grease or brake fluid on those pads will absorb them. And then that'll make it more difficult for the vehicle to stop, and then the friction will heat that stuff up and could cause a brake fire as well. So check out the drums, check out the linings there. Here we go with our pressure test. This is going to be a series of tests for your air brake system. This is one that I recommend. If you're not doing this before every shift, you're putting your crew at danger, you're putting the public at danger. Doesn't cost anything to do these tests. They should be done before every shift, right? We want to make sure that the air compressor is working. So you're gonna if you've got less than 100 psi or whatever the reading is on your air pressure gauges, right? Typically, they're set to kick on. Your air compressor kicks on at about 100 psi, kicks off at 125. So you have the thing running with your RPMs up and watch to see that the gauge stops rising when it gets to that top number, typically like 125. Then so now you've got the engine running. You're watching to see that it goes up to 125 and stops. Then you start pumping that brake pedal in and out on the brake pedal. Every time you pump that brake pedal in and out, that's going to start bleeding air out of the system. You're watching, and then whatever that cut in is, maybe it's 100 or whatever the manufacturer tells you, right? When you get below that, you should see that the compressor should kick in, and you should see that needle start working its way back up. So that's how we're testing the 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 air pressure governor test, right? So that's working. If that's not working and the air pressure's not coming on and off, you may not have enough air pressure to drive safely. So that's the first part of the test, right? Um, so you after you've done that, you let the pressure build all the way back up, okay, uh, till it gets up, and then we're gonna test the leakage rate without pressing the foot brake. So we want the ignition to be off. All right, the engine should not be running so that we can listen. You could Then you set the ignition to the on position. Don't start it up because typically we've got to have the ignition on so the gauges work, right? You're going to release the parking brake and check to see if the air pressure gauge moves, right? Listen for leaks. You shouldn't, with those off, you shouldn't lose more than like 2 psi after that initial drop. If you're still losing air after you've done that, it tells you there's an air leak in the system, into the parking brake system. Okay. Then we test the service brake. All right. So this time we're going to apply the foot pedal, right? The ignition's on, it's not started. The parking brake is still released. We've got the knob pushed in where it was for our last test. You're going to push the brake fully, okay? Apply it fully and watch the air pressure gauge. When you first push the pedal in, you're going to lose some air pressure, but after that, for the next minute, you shouldn't lose more than maybe 3 psi, just a little bit. Listen for air leaks. If you get any air leaks or if that gauge is dropping quickly, tells you that there's an air leak in the service brake system. Low pressure warning signal, that's the next thing. We're going to continue on with this test. So now we've got the ignition on, we have the parking brake released. We're going to pump the brake pedal. We're going to keep pumping it, and we're bleeding the air out of the system. Psh, 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 psh. Okay. At some point, typically about 60 psi, there should be some kind of, when it gets down that low, when it drops below, you should hear some sort of a warning buzzer, some sort of a light should light up. We're testing to make sure that that's working. That's telling us that we're at low pressure. Now, the engine isn't running, so the air compressor's not going to kick in, and it's not going to fill it back up. So as we're slowly bleeding air out of the system by pumping that brake pedal, we're looking to see if we get that warning that there's low pressure. Because if we're out there driving and we have a major air leak or something like that, we want that warning ahead of time. What happens when we lose all of our air for the brakes? The brakes lock on. Okay, not good when we're driving down the road, right? Parking brake check. All right. So we've done that. We've bled it down to about 60 psi, right? Where the warning comes on. Now, the parking brake is released, right? The parking brake is off. As we continue to pump that brake pedal and we're pumping the air out of the brake system, when it gets low, at some point when it gets low, it should cause the air brake handle there that you have pushed in, that should pop back out. Okay. When there's no air pressure, that thing pops back out. The springs that hold the brakes on. Okay. So if you're driving and you get that buzzer, that warning for low air pressure, but don't wait for the brakes to lock on automatically. You got to start getting pulled over and get stopped. If the air gets low enough, typically below like 20 psi, those brakes are going to automatically lock on, okay, when you run out of air pressure. So that's what we're testing there to make sure that they're going to lock on. Once we've done all of that, okay, and we've got the system bled out, um, then we can fire the engine up, increase the engine RPMs. If you've got a high idle switch, you can throw that on. Just push the accelerator down to bring up the engine RPMs. Take a look at how much time it takes to build your pressure. Um, the Your manufacturer's got some different specifications. What sort of recommend it shouldn't take more than about 45 seconds to get you to move from 85 to 100 psi. To refill that as you're driving and using air uh, by applying the brakes, right? That compressor needs to be able to build back up quick enough to keep you with enough supply of air to keep your brakes functioning. So that's the last test, looking at how long it takes to get that air pressure built back up and restored. All right. I'm running out of time here. Fortunately, I'm on my last topic. My last topic, I won't spend a lot of time on it, but it's about cleanliness of the vehicle, right? And if we keep our vehicle, our apparatus clean, it makes it easier to inspect and it helps it to last longer. So take care of what you've got. There's a pride thing in it. There's a, looking good for the public, but also just mechanically speaking, it's easier to inspect if there's no dirt, there's no grime on it. If the engine's clean, it lets us check for leaks. Diesel leaves like a gummy film that collects dirt and dust. That's going to point to where those leaks are, keep things nice and clean. Some of your linkages, fuel injectors, other things, if it gets too dirty, they can stop working. If you keep that undercarriage of the thing clean, of your truck clean, you can see those mechanical defects. You can see what's going on if there's problems when things are kept clean. We don't want to go real crazy in the engine compartment. Be careful. You don't want to expose electrical connections to water and things like that. You don't want to over clean the engine that you're washing away, lubricant, grease, and things like that. But generally speaking, right, keeping things cleaner is better all around. Who should do that at a minimum, right? Driver, operator. Keep the thing washed. Wash the exterior. Clean out the interior so there's no trip hazards. Clean out any trash. Keep the dirt and debris out of there. Nice, clean work environment. Take care of the glass. Clean the glass. Make sure that you can see well out of the glass so you can keep that situational awareness and stuff like that. If you've got the ability to put some automotive wax on that paint job, that makes the paint last longer. The paint lasting longer helps to inhibit rust. Wax helps to keep the paint from fading. It keeps it looking newer. It helps shed water off of it. It helps to shed dirt off of it. A nice freshly waxed vehicle will help stay cleaner. Freshly waxed vehicle, if it gets dusty or dirty, sometimes you can just rinse it with a little bit of water. So if you've got the ability to keep a coat of wax on that, that would be awesome. That it's just another part of that. I'm going to open up the floor to some questions here, but we are sort of up against our time. So let me wrap up the formal portion of this by thanking you guys for listening to me. Look, if you're not a driver, an operator, it's still good to know this information. We'll share this slideshow for you so that you can go back and look at this as a reference guide as you develop your own policy and procedure. This is for everybody, right? If you're riding in the vehicle, you want your operator to have done these inspections because they're keeping you safe, especially checking the brakes and stuff like that, right? So a little bit of something for everybody, even if you're not a driver and operator. Hope you enjoyed today's class. We have plenty of seats available here. So if you know somebody that might benefit from this training, please go ahead and invite them to come along. I'm going to wrap up the formal portion. Thank you all, and I hope to see you all again next week as we transition into our tea time. Stick around if you've got it.